Hi guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. It's so greatly appreciated. It truly is. Before we get started, let me give you my usual disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only. Please do not take what I say as fact. Please always do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Next, if you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please consider doing so. It really helps me out and I really appreciate it. Today we're talking about James Rupert, and he pretty much annihilated his entire family on Easter Sunday in 1975. Okay, so March 30th, 1975, 41-year-old James Rupert shot and killed 11 members of his family who were all enjoying Easter Sunday together at his mother's home on Minor Ave in Hamilton, Ohio. To understand why James would take out his entire family, 11 members of his family, we have to go way back to the beginning. James was the second son of Charity and Leonard, born on March 29th, 1934. He had one sibling, a brother named Leonard Jr. James didn't have the best upbringing at all. His father, Leonard, had a very violent temper and wouldn't show James or his brother very much love or affection at all. He would end up passing away in 1947 when James was 12 and Leonard was 14 years old. His mother, Charity, wasn't much better than her late husband. She wanted James to be a girl. In fact, she was incredibly disappointed when he arrived with a penis. I'm just keeping it real. But even worse, she didn't keep this disappointment from James. She willingly and quite often shared it with him. That's awful. After the death of his father, Leonard Jr. would step up and take over role of the household. He would constantly pick on James during their upbringing, and he would taunt him with the name calling. This would affect James so greatly that when he was 16 years old, he would run away from home and he would attempt to unalive himself by hanging himself with a bed sheet. But this attempt was unsuccessful, and after this, James would end up returning back home. At that time, I'm sure so many people were happy that this attempt was unsuccessful, never realizing that had he taken his life, that I know this sounds terrible. I don't mean it to sound terrible, but the truth of the matter is, had he been successful that day, it would have saved the lives of 11 people on March 30th, 1975. James was described as a modest, bookish, and helpful man who was just very quiet. In 1975, James was a 41-year-old college dropout who was unemployed, unmarried, and still living at home with his mother. He had very little friends and only a few ex-girlfriends. His brother, on the other hand, was incredibly successful. He was a college graduate. He had a successful job as a software engineer. He owned his own home in the city of Fairfield, Ohio. He was married to one of his brother's ex-girlfriends, Alma, which I'm sure his brother was not happy about. And even worse, Leonard and Alma would go on to have 8 children together. Charity began to become increasingly frustrated over her adult son's inability to hold down a steady job and the fact that he was always drinking. As a result of this, she threatened to evict James from the home. And I can't blame her. He's in his 40s. At the very least, get a job and keep a job. On top of this, he owed Leonard a huge sum of money. James would lose a bunch of money in the stock market crash of 74, and it was his brother Leonard that bailed him out of his troubles by lending him the cash. About a month before the tragedy, James would walk into a store to buy ammunition and to inquire about a silencer for his weapons. It was around this time that James also began to fall into a deep depression. March 29th, 1975, The day before the murders was James's 41st birthday. Witnesses stated that they saw James doing some target practice with tin cans, his 22 caliber pistol, and his 22 caliber rifle along the Great Miami River in Hamilton. That night, James went out to a bar named the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge. Going out drinking was an everyday occasion for James. To be fair, there was a time where I went to the bar 6 nights a week religiously. But I was 21 and I was going to school full time and I was working full time, so there's that. While at the bar that night, James began chatting it up with the bartender, 28-year-old Wanda Bishop. He would tell her about how frustrated he was with his mother's demands on him and her threats of evicting him. Going on to tell her that she would tell him that if he could afford to buy beer 7 nights a week, then he could afford to pay rent. Fair. 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 He would tell Wanda that he needs to, quote, solve the problem. He would end up leaving the bar about 11 o'clock that night, but would return a few hours later. When he returned, Bishop asked him if he had solved the problem, to which he replied, no, not yet. James would end up staying at the bar that night until it closed at 2:30 in the morning. Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1975. James would end up spending the day in bed, sleeping off his drunken binge from the night before. While asleep, James's brother, 42-year-old Leonard Rupert, his wife, 38-year-old Alma Rupert, and their children, 17-year-old Leonard III, 16-year-old Michael, 15-year-old Thomas, 13-year-old Carol, 12-year-old Anne, 11-year-old David, 9-year-old Teresa, and 4-year-old John, all headed over to spend Easter Sunday with Mom/Grandma at Leonard's childhood home. When the family first arrived, they had a great time. They gave Grandma big hugs, ate some chocolate, and had an Easter egg hunt on the front lawn of the home. At around 4 o'clock, Charity was in the kitchen with Leonard and Alma making sloppy joes. Most of the children were in the living room playing. Some of the children were in the kitchen. It's at this point James finally decides to emerge from his drunken stupor and face the world. But not before loading a .357 Magnum, 2 .22 caliber handguns, and a rifle. He then headed down the stairs to where his family was laughing and enjoying their family time together. As he made his way into the kitchen, his brother Leonard asked him about his car, saying, "How's the Volkswagen doing?" For whatever reason, this was enough to trigger him, and he shot Leonard in the head. The brother that had put him down and belittled him his entire life. Next, he shot Alma, the woman that left him for his closest relative. Next came Charity, the mother that never saw him as good enough. After the adults were dead, he focused on his nieces and nephews. Every one of them. Killed every one of them. Once they were all done, he went around and he shot them again at close range just to be sure they were gone. The only person that was once was Alma, and she was through the heart. James Rupert shot those guns 44 times that day and struck his victims 40 times. He then sat down at the table and looked at what he did for the next 3 hours before calling 911 at 9:30 p.m. and telling the dispatcher there's been a shooting. The whole ordeal took about 5 minutes. He would later tell a psychiatrist that would testify under oath that after the killings, he laid on the couch for a few hours contemplating unaliving himself, but said that that was a mortal sin, even though he already tried it at the age of 16, and that he didn't want that to be his last act. So instead he decided to call the police. Police would say that there was no sign of a struggle except for a wastebasket in the home that was knocked over. So, I'm willing to bet, personally, that they were all in shock. The adults, at least the adults, were all in shock, and that their brains didn't even have enough time to process what was even happening before they were shot and killed. There was never a clear motive given, but I'm sure it falls somewhere between the way they made him feel growing up and the fact that if he got away with this, he was set to inherit $300,000, which would be equivalent today to about $1,677,546.
He ordered his family to collect his brother's $300,000 or so in life insurance. That's what I think. That's what I think the evidence showed, and that's what I believe.
By all accounts, the people that knew the Rupert family described them as very nice people. The crime scene. Oh God, the crime scene was so gruesome that there was so much blood on the first floor that it began to seep into the basement. And there are still bloodstains present to this day. James was arrested and charged with 11 counts of aggravated homicide. He refused to answer any questions or be cooperative. He just kept saying that he was going to plead insanity, which is what he did.
Along those same lines, Doctor, isn't it true that you have no way of telling the court what Mr. Rupert's ability to rationally discuss the case with his attorneys, to rationally assist in the preparation of a defense would be if he were not under the effect of either a major tranquilizer such as Thorazine or Trilofan at this time? Isn't that right?
I have no specific way of telling that other than to say that during the course of my examination with him, he was able at that time and under that condition with that dosage of medication to rationally confer with me and talk to me about what had happened.
James's first trial was held in Hamilton, Ohio in June of 1975. The three-judge panel found Rupert guilty on all 11 counts of murder and sentenced him to life in prison on July 3rd, 1975.
He was on the living room floor, right at the foot of the couch, and he had a tinfoil covered Easter egg near his right hand, and he'd been shot in the side of the head.
After the slaughter, James Rupert changed his clothes and called the cops. He was charged and tried for 11 murders. His attorney said he killed during a psychotic rage. They said he was insane.
Because the panel of judges were unaware that the decision had to be unanimous as opposed to majority rules, James's trial was declared a mistrial. His second trial would be held 125 miles away in Findlay, Ohio, because his defense argued that he would not be able to receive a fair trial in Hamilton. The second trial began on July 23rd, 1975. Prosecutors brought in witnesses that saw him engaging in the target practice the day before the murders. The employees at the gun shop where he inquired about the silencers testified. The bartender, he told that his mother's expectations were a problem that needed to, quote, be solved. She testified. Rupert would be found guilty for a second time on all 11 counts and given 11 consecutive life sentences. On appeal, James was granted a third trial in 1982. His defense attorney was so convinced that James suffered from severe mental illness that he hired a psychiatrist for his client and personally paid for it. His third trial began on July 23rd, 1982. The panel found James guilty on 2 accounts of first degree for his mother and his brother. However, he was found not guilty for the other 9 counts by reason of insanity.
Trial observers think the jury thought Rupert was nuts, but didn't want him to get the family money.
Had he been found not guilty by reason of insanity, he would have inherited the money.
Prosecutor Holcomb says none of the dozen psychiatric expert witnesses could agree on why James Rupert went berserk.
It's not my job to analyze him. It's not my job to feel sorry for him. It's not my job to figure out why. I leave that to others. My job is to get him locked up, and that's just exactly what I did.
After the trial ended, Alma Rupert's mother, Edna, spoke out saying, quote, "I sometimes think I'd like to string him up on the cross like Christ and cut a little piece off at a time. I'd want him to bleed slowly, but if you put that in the paper, people will wonder what kind of Catholic I am." End quote. Well, Edna, I am a Catholic, and I can tell you wholeheartedly that I would not and do not judge you or your faith for that statement. July 30th, 1982, at the age of 48, James Rupert was sent to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction.
James Rupert is still locked up. His first parole hearing is in 1995. He'll be 60 years old. But Holcomb is certain he will never get out.
In June of 1995, at the age of 61, Rupert was granted a parole board hearing, but his parole was denied. He received another hearing in 2005 at the age of 71 that was denied, and a hearing in April of 2015 at the age of 81 that was denied. After his last hearing, the parole board made a statement that read, quotes, "The board has determined that the inmate is not suitable for release at this time. The inmate has not completed any recommended programming and does not appear to be willing to do so. The inmate's record notes negative institutional conduct. The inmate took the lives of multiple victims. There has been strong community objections to his release. The release of this inmate would not be in the best interest of justice." End quote. I'm not sure why he was even given so many chances to go before the parole board to begin with, because he should have had life with no parole, period. Because even if he was charged with 2, he was found guilty for the mother and the brother. He was found not guilty for the rest of them because of reason of insanity. But that still means he did it. So why are we giving him... I don't understand. I don't understand why he had so many chances. I don't understand why he had any chances at the parole board, but... His next parole hearing was scheduled for April of 2025 at the age of 91. He would end up dying, though, on Saturday, June 4th, 2022, from natural causes at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, at the age of 88. A year after the murders, the home was opened to the public and the contents were auctioned off. It was cleaned, recarpeted, and rented to the public. A family that rented the home stayed there for a short time before they decided to move out, claiming that they were hearing voices and unexplained noises. The home now belongs to a single mom and her sons. All right, guys, if you're still here, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you. I appreciate you so very much. Leave me a like and a comment. Please subscribe if you haven't yet and you feel so inclined to do so. And until next time, stay safe out there.